I want to thank this mystery man, a young man who brought all this about. I just met him yesterday, and this is Mark Vargas. He's quite a guy, and he's the kind of guy who can get you out of prison if you find yourself stuck there. And I'm really grateful to his efforts and what he's done on my behalf.
Warning. The political trade features probabilities and perspectives about politicians, political parties, political outcomes, and political wagering. The political trade is rated NSFP, not safe for partisans.
Welcome back to The Political Trade, the podcast for people with a passion for politics, probability, and profits. I'm Jeff Joseph, editorial director of Luckbox magazine, hosting the podcast where conservatives and liberals, Republicans and Democrats, partisans and wingnuts converge to make money betting on politics by trading in the stock market for politics at predictit.org. That was the voice of former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich that you heard at the top of this broadcast. And that mystery man the governor was speaking about is the very special guest joining us on the show today, Mark Vargas, the man credited with brokering the executive commutation and subsequent early prison release for former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich. He joins Governor Blagojevich weekly on the Lightning Rod podcast. But today, he's with us, so strap in, political traders. Today, Mark is sharing the fascinating story of what it took to secure the governor's early release. We will also get Mark's insights as a political insider and end the episode by walking him into the political trading pits, where Mark will share the political prediction market bets that he would be making today. So to get the most out of the show, open up predictit.org, click on the Markets tab, which is top left, follow along, and leave your political ideologies at the door. And as always, I'm joined by Mike Reddy. Mike is an editor at Luckbox magazine, a prediction market trader, and the producer of The Political Trade. Mike, we've had some fascinating guests, but our advanced work with Mark suggests this will really be among our most interesting episodes. So we're going to pull back the curtain on Governor Blagojevich's commutation. What Mark has accomplished here is really unprecedented. There's no one else out there who has been involved as the principal in securing two very high-profile executive commutations. Not only did Mark nearly single-handedly secure Blagojevich's release, but he was also a material player in securing Roger Stone's recent commutation. So we've got quite a show here.
Well, I'll say, and just adding on to that, we've talked about the Stone clemency market quite a bit in the past, and if memory serves, it was all the way back in March that Anthony Scaramucci really nailed the forecast in that market. But there are other clemency markets on Predictit that are still open and still trading pretty closely, aren't there?
Yeah, currently Predictit has three clemency markets. There's one for Flynn, there's one for Manafort, and there's a self-pardon market for Trump. And I expect Mark will have some great insights on how to trade these markets. And one more note, today's listeners are going to be rewarded with a very special Luckbox Lockbox trade at the end of the episode. It's one that you may not be expecting. So let's bring Mark on. Mark, are you out there?
Jeff and Mike, it's an honor to join you here today. Thanks for this very kind invitation.
Well, thank you for joining us. This is your story, and we're going to give you a lot of room to tell it because it's such a fascinating story. But just for the sake of getting us started, tell us a little bit about your political background as to how you actually became engaged in politics, because I know your initial core business is as a tech entrepreneur. So what got you engaged in political backroom dealings?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I talk about this a lot, my lightning bolt moment. And that was on September 11th, 2001. I was a student at Judson University, and my mother called my dorm room that morning and said, "Mark, turn on the television." And so I stumbled out of bed and went to the main TV common area where my fellow college buddies were all gathered, and I walked in time just to see the second plane fly into the World Trade Tower. and everybody was in shock and in disbelief. And my initial gut reaction was, I'm going to do something about this. And so from that point on, my life had purpose and meaning and direction. And I didn't know what that would mean, but I just knew that I needed to play a role in some way, shape, or form. And so fast forward, I'm interning for House Speaker Dennis Hastert, who was my local intern. So I'm in Washington. I'm seeing world leaders and heads of state and people that I've only watched on television. I'm seeing them in real life, in person. It was an incredible experience. And I moved to Washington shortly after graduation. I made the decision, last minute decision. I didn't even have a job. I didn't really have a place to live. I only had $72 in my checking account, and I surprised or shocked my parents at dinner and said, I'm going to move to Washington. When? Tuesday, right? And this was a Friday. I remember it like it was yesterday. And so I didn't even have enough money to pay for my one-way ticket. So my parents bought my ticket, expecting that in about 4 to 7 days I'd be calling them back, asking them to fly me back home to Chicago. And I ended up staying in Washington for 12 years. And I got a job through divine intervention working at the Pentagon for the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And it was interesting. When you go into the Pentagon, you have to be escorted. Only those that have a security clearance and work for the Department of Defense, they're the only ones that are allowed to walk alone. Otherwise, you have to have an escort. And so went through security, and my escort brought me into the office, and I was applying. I was recommended to join a position on the Secretary of Defense Robert Gates' staff on a special task force to go to Iraq. And so I walk into the meeting, and they essentially ask me one question, and I was intimidated. I mean, they were Marine colonels and all these guys in suits and all the flags of all the branches and all these seals on the wall, and it's an intimidating office. And they asked me, you know where you're going, why? And this was a question that I had been preparing since 9/11/01 as a student at Judson, and watching that plane fly into the Second World Trade Tower. And without hesitation, without any preparation, I said these exact words. I believe that we're waging the battle of my life in the Middle East, and particularly in Iraq. And one day I want to look back and say that I was a small link in bringing stability to a war-torn country. They said, great answer. They got up and left. I asked my escort, what the heck happened? And she's like, I don't know. I've never seen this before. Following day, I get an email from the White House saying that I was hired, and that I had to fill out my SF-86, my security clearance form. And 3 weeks later, I was on my first trip into Baghdad. I took a total of 14 trips, 14 deployments into Iraq as a civilian with the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and was embedded with our military. And our job was to help drive down unemployment, because in areas where we saw extreme violence, high level of violence meant high unemployment. And so we were part of this civilian team that worked alongside our military and our civilian contractors. And so we started to reopen factories and put people back to work because unemployment was over 60%, violence was high. And so we discovered that in areas where we would reopen factories and put Iraqis back to work, that those areas would become secure and more safe. And so it was an incredible experience, an incredible journey. I learned a lot, but that was really my start getting into politics. And then I guess they could say the rest is history.
What year was that?
So from 2007 to 2010, yeah, it was still an active combat zone. So I deployed 14 times as a civilian between 2007 and 2010.
And of course, Gates was originally appointed by President George W. Bush and then retained for service by President Barack Obama afterwards. But you're working for a Republican Secretary of Defense and interning for Hastert. So far these are, well, let's see, so far these are Republican names. How is it that you find yourself in the odyssey of spending 2 years trying to release a Democratic governor from a prison sentence?
You know, the Wall Street Journal did a great job, gave them the exclusive to write a story on this. But, I just blindly had reached out to Patty Blagojevich on LinkedIn shortly after, in April of 2018, when the United States Supreme Court had denied their request to review their case. And I remember listening and watching in the news that they basically said that the only option left for the Blagojevich family is presidential clemency. And I had just made the decision right then and there. I'm gonna get Rob Blagojevich out of prison. I had flew back to Chicago, and my dad will tell you, my parents actually will tell you this story if you ever talk to them, that they picked me up at O'Hare Airport in the spring of 2018, and the first thing that I said when I got into the car was, "I'm going to get Rob Blagojevich out of prison." And they thought I was crazy. No, that's impossible. And so I had reached out to Patty and said, "I'm going to help." And I think that if there's a shot, it's going to take a Republican like me with Chicago roots who can get direct access to the president of the United States.
What was
And
the ideological connection, though? You were you are a self-proclaimed Republican. You were working for Republican interests. Rod Blagojevich was a very progressive Democratic governor. What was it about his case that attracted you to it and wanted to essentially cross party lines to engage?
the more that I read about Rob Blagojevich's case, the more I was convinced that he never should have gone to prison in the first place. And I began to connect the dots that the same people that were involved in the pre-dawn raid of the governor's residence in December of 2008 that we all remember, December 9th, the same people, Robert Mueller, Jim Comey, Jim Comey's best friend and the godfather of his children, Patrick Fitzgerald, the federal prosecutor in the Blagojevich case. Patrick Fitzgerald was also the federal prosecutor in the Scooter Libby case, which President Trump pardoned, President Trump pardoned. Patrick Fitzgerald was also the lead prosecutor in the Conrad Black case, who President pardoned. And now we're seeing this connection with Patrick Fitzgerald and the Blagojevich case. And so I started to connect these dots. And I know Anthony Scaramucci was a guest on your last on a previous episode, and Anthony Scaramucci actually was very instrumental. He played an important role in this, and it was interesting. Scaramucci then connected those dots and went on Judge Janine and said what they did to Governor Blagojevich was the fire starter for what they ended up doing to candidate Trump and President Trump. The same people, prosecutorial overreach, and they were emboldened. If they could take out a governor, why not set your sights higher? Why not try and take out the president of the United States? And so I wrote an initial op-ed, how Robert Mueller and James Comey's best friend sent Rob Blagojevich to prison. And I linked Laura Ingraham in it, and I was hoping it would catch your attention, and it did. And my op-ed was published like May 1st, and on May 3rd, Patty and their lawyer, Leonard Goodman, were on Laura Ingram's primetime show on Fox News Channel. And Laura opened up her show talking about Mark Vargas's op-ed in the Washington Examiner. And that really laid the groundwork and created the talking points for the same people that went after the governor, the same people that are going after the president. And I wanted to keep up the momentum. And so I asked Patty and Rod if, and I was only able to connect with Rod via email through Patty. I didn't have direct access to him. So I would send emails and give them to Patty, and then she would copy and paste and send them to Rod and vice versa. But I said, we need to keep up this momentum. We need to write a bigger, provocative op-ed. And we did. It's called I'm in Prison for Practicing Politics. And I said, I think I can get it published in the Wall Street Journal. And we did. It was published on May 27th. Of 2018, and on May 31st, the President of the United States was talking about Rob Blagojevich for the first time on Air Force One. And so, what was interesting, and I don't want to filibuster, but my point on this, what's interesting is the trajectory of this. On May 1st, my op-ed is published. On May 3rd, the Blagojeviches are on Fox News Channel with Laura Ingraham, and Laura Ingraham is agreeing with everything that was in the op-ed. On May 27th, we get this op-ed published in the Wall Street Journal, and on May 31st, the President of the United States is talking about how unfairly Rob Blagojevich was treated. So it was a remarkable first month, historic.
Well, let's step back a little bit, because Rod Blagojevich, as governor, has always been a fascinating case story, particularly for those of us in Illinois. He has a natural charisma. He connects as a retail politician in a way that very few have, and he had a very consistent track record on progressive issues, whether it be from education funding to anti-discrimination laws for gays and lesbians, He was the first really to make an effort to implement universal health care in Illinois, first through a program called All Kids, which made Illinois the first state in the nation to offer comprehensive health insurance for children. And he was the first Illinois governor elected as a Democrat since 1973. So it's quite a story, his election in 2003. He was subsequently found guilty of public corruption for attempting to solicit bribes to occupy the U.S. Senate seat vacated by then President-elect Barack Obama, who, of course, was an Illinois senator as well. And there's a clip that we've all heard in Illinois many times that was, of course, prominent at the trial brought forth by Patrick Fitzgerald, who you've acknowledged clearly was a very good friend and, close to James Comey.
I mean, I've got this thing, and it's fucking golden. And I'm just not giving it up for fucking nothing.
And that clip obviously was played frequently throughout Chicago and very prominent to the prosecution. The key story about the governor and why he's attracted so much interest across party lines seeking his early release refers more to the excessive sentencing than the question of his actual criminality. But with respect to his criminality, because you made a statement earlier that you didn't think he should be found guilty in the first place. So could you provide some context for the clip that we just played and what the case for his innocence would be?
Yeah, I hope at some point, and I'm convinced that Rod Blagojevich is going to get full exoneration. And here's why. What the Seventh Circuit did, and this is what really caught my attention, and the press is they're experts at creating this narrative, and these federal prosecutors. It's almost like they've hired a Manhattan public relations firm, but they control the narrative right from the very beginning. That shock and awe press conference after the arrest, and they come up with this saying, "Sale of the Senate seat," and we saw this with President Trump, Russia collusion, right? It fits, it's catchy, you can't forget it. But in the Blagojevich case, it's very, very important to highlight a couple of key points that oftentimes aren't covered. Number one, he never sold the Senate seat. Every time I ask, who did he sell it to? Okay. And for how much? They can't answer that because the Senate seat was never sold. And what the governor at that time was talking about, he wasn't talking about send me money or wire money to this offshore account. He was talking about legislative deals. He wanted to pass additional healthcare legislation. He had a capitals project. He had an infrastructure project. And so he was talking about deals. This was never about profiting. In fact, he's the only governor, I think, that has in Illinois that signed an executive order because Mike Madigan refused. This was in 2008, 2007. He signed an executive order, which I'm happy to provide to you as further evidence. But the executive order essentially prohibited his family from lobbying or making any money off the state of Illinois, either directly or indirectly, while he was governor. And he wanted Mike Madigan to pass that legislation, but Mike Madigan denied that legislation. Why? Because Mike Madigan is making millions and millions of dollars from his private law practice. And Mike Madigan's family is making millions and millions of dollars from doing business with the state, or those who currently do business with the state.
The cesspool that is Illinois politics historically and to this day is certainly the subject of many, many more podcasts. But and there's certainly no question about that. That continues. In fact, I know that's a subject of your podcast that you do with the governor today called Lightning Rod, which is something that our listeners should listen to because I know you're dealing with the Madigan front and center in those podcasts on a regular basis. But back to the governor, he was convicted of those charges and sentenced to 14 years in prison. And although the Seventh Circuit reversed some of his convictions,
including the sale of the Senate seat, the attempted
related to the sale of the Senate seat, that's exactly right. It did not alter his 14-year sentence, and he spent 8 years in prison as a result of that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Here's and before you get into your next question, I mean, here's the most important point that I want to hit. Here's why the Blagojevich case is so important, because what the Seventh Circuit did is they change the law. And this is why we wrote this op-ed, I'm in prison for practicing politics, because under the Blagojevich Standard, every elected official in the United States, from local, state, all the way on up to federal, they would all be in prison. Why? Because under the Blagojevich Standard, if a candidate or an elected official accepts just 1 cent of a campaign contribution from a donor or business, that's dirty money. It's a bribe. And so they've politicized the routine practice of campaign fundraising.
Of
And
politics.
so,
Yeah.
and you don't have, and you have to raise, that's politics. They're criminalizing politics, and you have to raise money. And they say, and they come up with the control, a shakedown. The governor never shook down the children's hospital. You know, if people knew what the conversations were behind the scenes, they'd be even more disgusted with politics. That's why dentists giving a root canal have a higher approval rating than a politician. But at the end of the day, the CEO of the Children's Hospital, he was head of the Chicago Hospital Association. By the way, they raise millions of dollars for candidates and elected officials. They're political powerhouses. They've got a lot of money. And so they had hosted a fundraiser before. And so the governor and his team is like, hey, yeah, of course. But, there's going to be, the expectation is always in politics. We're going to need some more. We're going to need another fundraiser, because they had hosted one before, and now it was running for needed a second one, and it was never about harassing, never a shakedown. They left one voicemail message. That was it. And but all of this stuff, exculpatory evidence, it's all hidden and kept out of the public. And so going back to those. The tape that you played earlier, what they don't play is what happened, what's said afterwards. And the governor has always said, play the rest of the tapes, but they haven't played the rest of the tapes. Did you know 99% of those tapes are the Blagojeviches and the lawyers are all under a lifetime gag order. They cannot share what's on the rest of those tapes. And there's a law of completeness. And I'm not a lawyer, but I've studied this. The law of completeness says, Jeff and Mike, that if you're accused of something, and they use a clip or an audio clip or something written, that the rule of completeness means that you've got to provide the entire context. In the Blagojevich case, they did not provide the entire context. The rule of completeness was ignored by federal prosecutors and the judge in the case. And so they would taunt him and during the trial and say, well, the governor, to the jury, well, the governor says that whatever he said was on the tapes, but ladies and gentlemen, jury, we've played the tapes for you. And I don't know, did you hear the governor say that on the tape? Well, of course not, because they didn't play that on the tape. But they were taunting him by saying that, and to the jury, that governor talks about this, but we don't hear it, right? Because they were purposefully withholding the rest of the tape to provide context. What he also says, I don't want to do anything illegal. And the reason why he's talking about deals is because the president-elect, Barack Obama, wanted Valerie Jarrett to be appointed to the Senate seat. And so it was coming from the president-elect. What does Governor Blagojevich want? Everything's on the table. Does he want an appointment? Does he want a cabinet secretary post? Or does he want an ambassadorship? Come back with some ideas. And so that's what the governor is talking about. It's golden. You've got the president-elect of the United States who wants Valerie Jarrett, a close family friend, appointed to the Senate seat. And the president-elect is saying, what do you want?
To your point, Blagojevich has always admitted that he wanted something in exchange for appointing Obama's replacement in the Senate. And he's never really denied that he tried to collect campaign donations from people who wanted some official act from him in return. But the question is not whether Blagojevich sought the quid, which is not in itself illegal, but whether he attempted to or did deliver the quo, which is illegal if delivered on condition of the quid. And that's the interesting point here, because you refer to the Blagojevich Standard, and it's become an expansive standard. And there's a guy named Harvey Silvergate. He's a prominent Boston civil liberties defense attorney who sharply criticized the prosecution. He said that a quote from him was, "Any idiot can indict a sitting governor. It's so easy because ordinary political acts qualify as federal felonies." He goes on to say Blagojevich was engaged in perfectly proper and very common political activity, referring to the quid pro quo, and his actions were squeezed into the rubric of federal fraud laws. He was quite reckless, but recklessness itself is not criminal conduct. And I think that is the reason itself that, there's question There seems to be little broader consensus questioning his guilt or innocence in terms of asking for something in exchange. But I think that really just weighed heavily on what appears in many people's eyes to be very, very extreme sentencing. And ultimately it's that extreme sentence that I think that allowed so many people to rally to his side. Tell us a little bit about how you were able to start to accumulate support for his release and how it came from across the aisles and from so many different sectors.
Yeah. Well, just very quickly to close the loop for your listeners to understand this, what's very interesting is again, Governor Pritzker under the Blagojevich Standard. It's no secret. Chicago Tribune reported that Governor Pritzker has given Mike Madigan's campaign a total of $7 million, something like $5 million while he was running for governor, and $2 million after he was elected governor. So $7 million to Mike Madigan. Why this is important? Because Mike Madigan is the only state speaker in the United States that has the sole authority who can control what legislation and what bills go to the floor in the House for a vote and ultimately get passed. Usually it's a rules committee. It's made up of a bipartisan group, and they decide collectively in a bipartisan matter what legislation goes to the floor for debate and for a vote. Mike Madigan has essentially eliminated that. It is only one person that decides. And so if Pritzker doesn't play with Madigan, if Pritzker doesn't put $7 million to Mike Madigan's campaign account, that means that Mike Madigan could totally screw up Pritzker's legislative agenda. So under the Blagojevich Standard, you don't have to infer a quid pro quo, but the $7 million transfer of funds transfer from Pritzker to Mike Madigan under the Blagojevich Standard is illegal and would put both Madigan and Pritzker in prison.
Well, there is a subsequent judicial consensus that's emerged that essentially says that the Blagojevich Standard that you're referring to would make criminals out of virtually every politician in America for the routine business of political deal making.
Every single politician in the United States would go to prison. And so it was that standard that caused a lot of people to say, wait a second, 14 years. In fact, Judge Zagel, the judge in the Blagojevich case, before the Blagojevich case, gave a mafia hitman who admitted to murdering a handful of people, gave him a 10-year sentence. Yet Rod Blagojevich, no victims, first time nonviolent offender, a 14-year sentence. And so we were able
specifically, if I can add, I think you may be referring to the sentence mob hitman Nicholas Calabrese, who admitted killing 14 people, yet he was sentenced by Judge Zagel to 12 years and 4 months behind bars in May of 2009. Not even 1 year for each murder committed.
No.
So same judge.
Yeah. That's right. Same judge. And thanks for highlighting that. It's very important for your listeners to see the stark contrast. But the unique bipartisan support was unbelievable. From the far left, we had Reverend Al Sharpton and Reverend Jesse Jackson and Eric Holder, who was the Attorney General under President Obama at that time when Rod was put in prison. He came out in June of 2018 and said, the Rod Blagojevich's sentence just didn't make sense. It was extreme, and I support a commutation and a reduction of that sentence. So we had those that are on the far left Democratic side of the political spectrum, and we had people that are on the far right, including David Keene, the former president of the National Rifle Association. And Rod Blagojevich, when he was a U.S. congressman, used to brag about his F- grade with the NRA. It wasn't even an F, it was an F-. And yet, many years later, you had the former NRA president, a very staunch conservative. He was chairman of the CPAC from like 1984 to 2011. And he wrote a letter to the president at my request. I've gotten to know David personally and his wife, Donna. They're very good friends, but David drafted a letter in which I got to the White House. And I thought, and I think I've shared this with you before, Jeff and Mike, but I thought the line in this was so profound. And it said, prison should be reserved for those that we're afraid of and not those that we're mad at. And Rod Blagojevich poses no threat to society. And already, nearly 8 years in prison, he has paid a debt that probably nobody else will ever understand or comprehend. And so I thought that was very, very powerful. And we had support from, Laura Ingraham came out publicly. Judge Janine came out publicly. Anthony Scaramucci came out publicly. Martha McCallum, who had Patty on her show 4 or 5 times, which was unbelievable. And so we just had this broad, unique, bipartisan coalition. And I like to liken this, the support for the First Step Act, the criminal justice reform, was unique. It was broad, it was diverse, it was bipartisan. And we saw that exact same unique support for Governor Blagojevich's release. And everyone was questioning 14 years. Yeah, that just doesn't make sense.
In addition to Eric Holder and Dick Durbin and Reverend Jesse Jackson, there was also Chicago, hardcore Democratic senators like representatives like Bobby Rush and Danny Davis, also coming out in support of him. I thought it was unique that I saw in researching this that his fellow inmates also wrote letters in support of reducing his sentence. Apparently during confinement, he devoted himself to teaching classes, mentoring, and providing personal and professional help, and talking to prisoners about their civic duties. So he clearly had a lot of support. How many names in all? Has the letter ever been released that was sent to the president?
No, I mean, there's a lot of sense. Maybe at some point it will. We just certainly had a lot of names on there that were sensitive, very influential people. So the White House has that, and we were going to allow the White House and the president to make that decision as to what names would be released. And I assured everybody that we personally would not release those names, that it would be up to the White House and to the president to release those. But yeah, I mean, we had very, very unique support. It really was just humbling.
And was that you who curated the signatures to that letter?
Yeah, Patty and I were tag teaming, and so together we were able to
Patty Blagojevich, the governor's.
Yeah, right. We were able to work hand in glove to make sure that we got all of the names and signatures so that we could reiterate to the president that he's got some very unique support. And what was interesting is even during Rod Blagojevich got into the Chicago mayoral debates, I remember the NAACP Chicago had a debate with all of the candidates on there, and it was interesting. Even Paul Vallis, and I've gotten to know Paul Vallis personally, the former CEO of Chicago Public Schools, ran for governor against Rod Blagojevich in 2002. They had a real tough campaign. He ran for mayor this last couple of years ago. Certainly not friends, but Paul Vallis met with me and said, listen, I'm no friend of Rod Blagojevich, but that just did not make sense, his 14-year sentence. So he was supportive of it. Even Tony Preckwinkle I'll never forget this, Tony Preckwinkle during the NAACP Chicago event said, Paul Vallis and I were talking backstage, and this is on record, it's in the Chicago Tribune, they printed this. Said, Paul Vallis and I were talking backstage, Rod Blagojevich got 14 years and he never took a dime. And that was absolutely correct, 14 years. And so for never taking a dime. Even George Ryan, former Governor George Ryan, Craig Wall from ABC7 interviewed George Ryan, and I loved his comment. He said, clearly Rod Blagojevich and I are not friends, right? We're on opposite sides of the political spectrum, but he got a raw deal, and I'm happy to see him. I'm happy to see him come home. And so it was really unique, the support that we had. There's no other way to describe it.
Well, the pardon powers of the president are based on Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, which is Section 2, Clause 1. And of course, there's a distinction, which I think is often lost to many, between a pardon and a commutation, which a commutation being synonymous with clemency. That's the mitigation of a sentence for someone that's currently serving a sentence for a crime or conviction without canceling the conviction itself, whereas a pardon is an executive order that grants clemency for a conviction. In this case, the governor's sentence was a commutation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Or the governor received a commutation by executive order. Do you expect he'll receive a pardon?
I'm confident that there will be vindication. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, what are the presidential pardons that have been Obviously, the president's done a number of pardons and commutations. I think around 25 all in, and there's some really notable and memorable ones so far. Michael Milken was pardoned, of course. Bernie Kerik, the New York City police commissioner on 9/11, was pardoned by this president. Ed Bartolo, a former owner of the San Francisco 49ers. Who else has been pardoned under the
Scooter Libby, Conrad
Scooter Libby?
Black?
Yeah. Well, it clearly seems though the president's sending a message to Patrick Fitzgerald and James Comey in terms of going at with the Libby and Black and Blagojevich pardons because of their friendship. I would think that's fair to say. It was interesting. Just a couple days ago, it did not receive a lot of press, and it likely should have. I see that the president pardoned Susan B. Anthony just a couple days ago.
That's right.
Yeah, the announcement came 100 years to the day after the 1920 ratification of the 19th Amendment, which gave the women the right to vote.
And boy, what a crime that did she commit, right? Unbelievable. Life in prison for casting a vote as a female in the 1872 presidential election. I mean, how outrageous is that?
That's right. The New Yorker back then described her two-day trial in 1873 as the greatest judicial outrage history has ever recorded. There was another pardon worth noting from the president, and I think this all helps for the political traders out there. This is a president that's prone to making pardons. He's going to use that power, and he's going to use it also to make a political statement, not just a personal statement. Which I guess Roger Stone would be in many ways, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But Jack Johnson was also pardoned by the president.
That's
right. That was in 2018. He's the first black heavyweight boxing champion, kind of a barrier breaker. He had a criminal conviction in 1913 for transporting a white woman across state lines, and President Obama refused to sign a congressional request to pardon him in 2015. Yet the president did it, and of course,
and do you know why?
Why? No, why?
The reason why that President Obama, many people asked him to pardon Jack Johnson because Jack Johnson's actually buried in Chicago by the cemetery next to Wrigley Field. That's where his grave is. That's where his final resting place is. Obama did not grant a pardon to Jack Johnson because he wanted to save pardons for those that were still alive. But it would have sent an incredible message to pardon Jack Johnson. And so President Trump came in and said, Obama didn't do this because why? This is a unique power of the presidency. I'm going to pardon him. And then we saw that exactly with Susan B. Anthony for just a few days ago. But yeah, for your listeners and traders out there, the president, his secret sauce is being unpredictable and doing things that people thought, no, you can't do that. No, that's impossible. No, that doesn't make any sense. And the president ends up surprising you and doing it. But there's always a reason behind it.
Do you have any insight into the pardon of Alice Marie Johnson? She, of course, is the 65-year-old woman who spent 21 years in prison for nonviolent drug and money laundering charges. And of course, she was highlighted in the State of Union address. And I just heard a couple days ago that she'll be speaking at the RNC. But do you know anything about how that came about?
Yeah, absolutely. Kim Kardashian and some of my friends at Cut 50, Van Jones, who I work closely with on criminal justice reform, and Jessica Jackson, the co-founders of Cut 50, they work closely with Kim Kardashian and to help get Alice Marie Johnson home. But hers is a case in point of African Americans that have been screwed by a racist and unfair criminal justice system. Here is Alice Marie Johnson, who got a life sentence. She never touched the drug. She was a middle person. And here she was spent all this time in prison. It is outrageous. And so, the president was looking at ways, the president's always looking at ways to widen the tent for the Republican Party. And for years, African Americans, for decades, have been voting primarily Democratic. And so President Trump wanted to mix that up. And so he took the bold move. Under his leadership, we passed historic criminal justice reform legislation. And throughout that whole process, the president was obviously thinking about Alice Marie Johnson and so many others, African Americans and Latinos, that have been totally screwed by this racist criminal justice system. And I'm not sure if you knew this or not, probably Jeff and Mike, but Jared Kushner takes this issue to heart and very seriously because his father, Charles Kushner, went to prison. And it was Chris Christie, who was the federal prosecutor, that put Charles Kushner in prison, which is why you never see Chris Christie in a Trump administration position, because Jared Kushner does not want Chris Christie to be in government because of what he did to his father. And so Jared would visit his dad. Jared lived in New York, and his dad was sentenced to prison in Alabama. Every Sunday, Jared would fly down and visit his father in prison. And so, he took notes and saw how it's not a good situation for families, and you're treated like animals in prison. It's inhumane. And so Jared Kushner thought to himself, if I'm ever in a position to help change this broken system and racist system, I'm going to do something about it. So God bless Jared Kushner and God bless the president, because they stood tall, and we passed this historic legislation. But we incarcerate more people than any other country in the world.
Yeah, more than Russia and China combined, actually.
Combined,
Yeah.
we spend over $40 billion a year to keep inmates in prison. We spent Women, prior to the First Step Act, women were chained and handcuffed to the hospital bed if they gave birth while in prison. First Step Act said, no, we're going to take those chains and handcuffs off. We're going to let women give birth with dignity, right? We were, for First Step Act, what President Trump and Jared Kushner have been doing, and they did do with the First Step Act, was they were restoring dignity back into this broken and racist criminal justice system. So women now, if they go to prison while they're pregnant, they no longer have to be chained and handcuffed to the hospital bed while they deliver.
In the course of working on securing the commutation for the governor, did you ever speak directly to the president?
I never spoke directly to the president, but I would always speak directly to Jared Kushner.
So Jared Kushner, is fair to say, is somewhat of the acting chief of staff in a lot of ways. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, he's very influential in the West Wing, and he's married to the president's favorite child.
Right. So
Ivanka.
how did it come to be that so you're engaged to secure the release of Governor Blagojevich? You're successful. He identifies you as a mystery man, which is an interesting story. But then you find yourself working on Roger Stone's release. How did that come to be?
Yeah, Roger and I have some close mutual friends, and late spring, early summer, I got a message from our mutual friend and said, hey, Roger's facing prison time, and there's very few people who really understand this process. And what you did with Governor Blagojevich was a miracle. And do you mind talking to Roger? So I set up a call and had a call. Roger called me, and he expressed the same thing. He said, Mark, I don't know you, but what you did for Governor Blagojevich was an absolute miracle. And I need that subject matter expertise to help me with my case. And are you willing to help? And so I did. And one of the first things that and Bernie Carrick's a very good friend of mine, and he was pardoned by the president on the same day as Governor Blagojevich on February 18th. He was the New York City police commissioner on September 11th. It was Rudy Giuliani's police commissioner, a protege of Rudy Giuliani. They're very, very close. Giuliani obviously is one of the president's personal lawyers. But Bernie Carrick and I got involved, and one of the first things that Bernie and I did when we started advising Roger in early June, was that you got to get off the pardon kick. The president's not going to do anything while you're talking about a pardon. If there's a chance for you to get a commutation, for you to be released early from prison, or for you not to go to prison at all, you've got to start talking about a commutation. And so Roger then pivoted in early June. You can see it in the news when Roger pivots from a pardon to a commutation chatter, and started giving interviews talking about now he's looking for a commutation, even though he had printed shirts that said "Pardon Roger Stone" and was selling thousands of them online. It was too late for a T-shirt for commute Roger Stone, but that's okay. We just started changing that narrative, and 3 to 4 days before Roger was set to report to prison, President Trump did commute his sentence, which was unique because I don't think anyone has ever been commuted from their prison sentence before they actually report to prison. I think that might be actually the first time in executive clemency history that someone didn't even have to step foot in prison, even though they were due to report in 4 days. And so after Roger got the call from the president, I talked to him. He had just literally gotten off the phone with the president, and he just said, "Mark, thank you for your work." And he said, "You're 2 for 2."
Well, certainly, history supports that. Presidents aren't prone to do pardons in the middle of their term. President Clinton obviously pardoned 140 people on the last day of his office in January 2001. That includes, of course, billionaire fugitive Mark Rich, and even his own brother Roger Clinton, which caused some scrutiny there. But you find yourself now meeting the governor for the first time. Did you speak to Governor Blagojevich at any point during this process? And when did you ultimately meet?
I never did. Again, we were only able to exchange messages through Patty. I would email Patty and then text message her the text, and then she'd copy and paste it and then email it to Rod, because he has Core Links, which is at the time it's private. It's an email system for federal inmates, and I wasn't allowed to talk to him on the phone. In fact, I wasn't even allowed to visit him in prison, because in federal prison there's a rule: you have to prove that you've known the inmate in person before they were incarcerated. And I didn't know Governor Blagojevich before. I'd never met him before he was incarcerated. I'd only seen him once. And I'll tell you this quick story. And I think it's a really powerful story. The one time I did see Governor Blagojevich in person is in 2005, the day he was giving the State of the State address. I was working for Steve Rauschenberger, Republican State Senator Steve Rauschenberger. He was running for governor. I was working on campaigns to get Blagojevich out of office. And I was in the Capitol Rotunda in Springfield, and everybody was in the House chamber waiting for Governor Blagojevich to walk in and deliver his State of the State address. And it's me and this elderly lady in a wheelchair in the Capitol Rotunda, and I'm just kind of wandering around, hanging out, because I've got nothing else to do. And elevators open, and out walks Governor Blagojevich with his four-man security detail. And I remember, the hair, right? The dark hair. And he had this incredible looking pinstripe suit. And he looks over and he sees the woman in the wheelchair, and he walks over to her, and he gets down on both of his knees. And I remember thinking, that's a nice suit. Why are you kneeling down on the dirty floor? And because he wanted to talk to her at eye level. He didn't want to bend down and talk to her. He wanted to talk to her at eye level. So he gets on both of his knees, and he chats with her, takes a photo with her, shakes her hand, gets up, dusts off his suit pants, and he sees me in the corner, kind of standing in the corner, and he puts his right hand in his pocket. He looks over at me, smiles and nods, and then walks into the House chamber. And that was the only time that I had met Governor Blagojevich or had seen him in person, was in 2005. Fast forward 2020, I'm walking into the FCI Englewood in Denver, outside of Denver, Colorado. I've got his clothes on one hand and his box of new shoes. He wanted New Balance shoes. He had a request in my other hand. I go through security at the prison. There's helicopters flying above. There's press everywhere. And so I say, I'm here for Rod Blagojevich. And so...
Was it just you? Did Patty join you?
No, I was the only one that flew out to go get her. We had already organized that I was going to be the one to pick him up. And what was funny is that he was in the door that everyone remembers, where he reported the prison. When you're discharged in a separate building on the other side. So everyone, all the cameras and reporters and the helicopters were hovering around that building, but he was being discharged in another building on the other side. So everyone missed this. And so I walk in, I've got his clothes, and all of a sudden there's about 4 prison guards that kind of gather around, and they were nice, and a little chatty. And all of a sudden a side door opens, and I hear this rolling sound, and I see this push cart with like 10 boxes on top of it, and there's Governor Blagojevich and he looks over at me and he goes, "Mark?" And I go, "Governor?" And he's like, "It's nice to meet you." And I hand him his clothes and his blazer on a hanger and his shoes, and I said, "Get dressed, Rod. We're going home." And while he was getting dressed in the bathroom there in the lobby of the prison, a prison guard walked me out, and I took his 10 boxes and piled them up in the car. and brought the push cart back. And they kind of joked about it, that they're going to miss this entire thing with the reporters because they were all gathered at looking at the wrong building. All the lenses were focused on the wrong building. So even when the governor and I walked out of the prison and the helicopters were hovering above, they missed us walking out. So we got into the car, about a 45-minute drive from the prison to the Denver airport. And it was interesting because we were listening on the news. I'm listening to the news and following on Twitter, and they're saying the governor has not yet been released from prison, but we're going to catch it. When he does, we're going to catch him being released. Little do they know that we've been in the car for 45 minutes and we're about 5 minutes from the airport.
It really is quite a story. And
my last point on this, what was interesting, and that's what led to the mystery man, the clip that you played at the top of the program. But what was interesting is then people started to ask questions. Wait a second, this guy that's with Governor Blagojevich, it's not his lawyer, it's not Patty or the girls. And all of a sudden the question, who is this guy? After 8, and I remember that night on the PBS, WTTW, Chicago Tonight, they were saying, who is this guy? Because after 8 years in prison, this is the first face that he sees. It's not Patty, it's not the girls, it's not their lawyers, it's not any of his brother or any family members or close friends that they knew. It's this mystery type guy. Who is he? And so it was kind of created that mystery man mystique until the following day when he said, referred to me actually as the mystery man, and he's the kind of guy that can get you out of prison, which has been both good and bad. I've gotten hundreds of messages from across the country from inmates and their families.
It's probably only increased your political access as a result of it. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit because I know we're going to be talking more in the trade segment about the existing clemency markets that exist on Predicted, about Flynn and Manafort, and even the opportunity for the president to self-pardon himself if there was never need to. So I know we're going to touch on that when we get to the trade segment, but you're no longer a mystery, and the result of that is that's only increased your access. You have a channel of communication with Jared Kushner and others whose names that you've mentioned. So maybe this isn't the time, with 3 months before the election, to be talking about 2024, but maybe you can give us some forward insight. What does 2024 look like? What should we know about who the likely candidates that look likely to emerge down the road?
Well, two very likely candidates in my mind is Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, who's a dynamic person and absolutely incredible, and was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations here under President Trump. And the other candidate that I think that might be a surprise or not so surprised to look out for is Ivanka Trump. I think Ivanka could very well be a presidential candidate in 2024, which would make a very unique matchup between Nikki Haley and Ivanka Trump in the primary.
Is this anecdotal, or is there another basis by which you base this conjecture on?
I mean, I think the Trumps, to a certain extent, might view themselves as Kennedys, or that public service. President Trump could be looking at 8 years in the White House, quite possibly, and Ivanka, she's articulate, she's smart, she's an entrepreneur, successful businesswoman, she's an amazing wife and mother to their children. So she would be a very interesting candidate, and she would hold the Trump mantle, and the strong support that Trump has, that 35% base that are just hardcore Trump supporters. Ivanka would be very interesting, and Nikki Haley is kind of balanced, the pro-Trump and the mediocre Trump supporters and anti-Trump supporters. She kind of walks a fine line, because at times she'll criticize the president and other times she'll praise the president. So Nikki Haley really walks a unique line. And during her book tour last year, it was like rock star status when she would have these book events with thousands of people in attendance. And, they would ask her during these Q&A periods, who inspires you to get into politics? And Nikki Haley never backed down. She said it was Hillary Clinton. So I think that's an interesting answer coming from a former Republican governor from a state like South Carolina, and, certainly a Trump supporter and admirer, but for her to come out and say it was Hillary Clinton that inspired me years ago to get into politics. But I think it'll be a very interesting potential matchup between Ivanka and Nikki Haley in 2024. Look out for that. You may even see a Mark Cuban in 2024.
You read my mind. I was just going to ask about Mark Cuban, because we're right now over at Luckbox at our magazine, we're working on our next issue, which is going to be a political issue. And one of the things our editorial team has contemplated is what happened to a third-party candidate this year. And of course, there were candidates. There was Michael Bloomberg, who made the disastrous mistake to run as a Democrat instead of independent, and of course Howard Schultz from Starbucks and Mark Cuban were all potential candidates. And I know you have a friendship with Mark Cuban. So what happened to him in 2020, first of all, and should we look to him in 2024?
Yeah, Mark, and I don't mean to name drop any of this, but we are really, really good friends, and we talk often. And in fact, I invited him to come out to my event. I have my own speaker series, Conversations with Mark Vargas, as part of the World Leaders Forum at Judson University, my alma mater. And I launched it in May of 2019 and asked Mark if he would come out and be my first guest, and he was. He flew out just for my event. Wonderful. Waived his appearance fee, did it for free. We raised over $80,000 for student scholarships, for entrepreneurial and diversity scholarships for students to attend Judson. It was unbelievable. But Mark and I have talked at great length about this. A couple of interesting things. If Mark were to run for president, he would run as a Republican. He's more of a middle of the road kind of guy, but he, in terms of fiscal responsibility, he leans towards a Republican. He's a libertarian, but he knows that if he runs for president, he can only really a Republican or a Democrat, and he'll run as a Republican if that does happen. I could tell you from firsthand knowledge, he was very seriously thinking about running for president in 2020. Very, very seriously thinking about it. But his daughters are teenagers, and they would have kicked his ass if he would have run for president. And his wife, even more so. I think he was more afraid of his wife than his daughters. But it wouldn't have been a friendly home environment, particularly for having teenage daughters and your dad's running for president. So the timing wasn't right. But Mark is interesting. Mark's reached that point where now he's looking for a legacy. And it's not necessarily owner of Dallas Mavericks, NBA championship team, star of Shark Tank. He's looking for a legacy, and one of his top priority right now is healthcare and healthcare reform. And so I've been working with Mark on that, and it's public knowledge. We've given interviews on it and have spoken about it publicly. But and I think running for president is another part of that, leaving that legacy. So it's interesting that these billionaires like a Donald Trump or like a Mark Cuban, these outsized personalities that have a huge fan base, that are reality TV stars, that have been in movies. Both of them have been in movies. I mean, it's very similar, both of that billionaire status. At the end of the day, it's not about buying a bigger house or a bigger plane or investing in more companies. It's about a legacy. And Mark Cuban is very seriously thinking about a legacy, and that legacy could include a presidential run or having influence on substantive policy issues like reforming our broken healthcare system.
So it exists as a market unpredicted right now. Will Mark Cuban run for president in 2020? That clock is really winding down, but that sounds like an emphatic no at 97 cents. Is that fair to say?
100% fair to say.
There we go. So that's a preview to our trade segment. We're going to take a quick break right now, but in just a moment, we're going to come back to walk Mark into the trading pits. All that and more coming up. But first,
want a little more luck in your life? Get Luckbox, the control freak's guide to life, money, and probability. Named the best new magazine of 2019. Luckbox is a must-read for side hustlers, gamblers, entrepreneurs, and active investors. Each issue features best bets from prediction market experts, as well as timely sports wagering, stocks, options, futures, and cryptocurrency trading ideas. You can buy Luckbox on newsstands, but with this special offer, listeners of the Political Trade can receive a 10-issue digital subscription absolutely free. Just visit getluckbox.com to receive the award-winning magazine right in your inbox. Don't rely on luck. Get Luckbox for free today. Learn more at getluckbox.com.
Welcome back to the Political Trade with political insider Mark Vargas. And we're going to step into the trading pits now with Mark. That means we're going to be looking at predicted markets and coming up with some actionable recommendations based on Mark's insights. And just a reminder to listeners, you're looking at predicted.org, the markets tab at the top left. And remember, when we discuss a contract price on Predicted, it's synonymous with what the market forecasts the probability of that specific outcome to be. So a contract trading at 34 cents implies a 34% probability of that outcome occurring. So keep that in mind. Cents and percentages are interchangeable in this discussion. So Mark gave us a list of markets that he's ready to make some wagers on, and we're going to bring them up in order. Mark, the very first market that you want us to look at is, will Trump grant clemency to Michael Flynn in his first term? And of course, Michael Flynn served as the 24th U.S. National Security Advisor from late January to mid-February 2017. In December 2017, he pleaded guilty to a felony count of willful and knowingly making false statements to the FBI. Today, Flynn's tied up in legal battles to get his case dismissed. More recently, he's been petitioning the D.C. Circuit to issue a writ of mandamus against Emmett Sullivan, the judge who is presiding over the case. This thing is dragging out a little bit, and it harkens us back to when Anthony Scaramucci was a guest on our show, and we asked him about this specific market.
Yeah, I think Flynn is a harder one, to be honest. I mean, I know they have it priced up there, but I think he's under 50. And the reason I think he's under 50 is that Flynn doesn't have anything on the president. The pardons that he's done recently have all been related to the potentiality of his reelection. And so I don't see how Flynn or Manafort help him with reelection.
Currently, in that market, will Trump grant clemency to Michael Flynn? Anthony is right. The yeses are trading below 50 at 39 cents. The no's are at 62 cents. I imagine you might have some exception with Anthony's observations there. What what can you tell us, Mark?
Yeah, the president wants to see how this plays out in the courts. They're jerking Flynn around, but second term, the president, if the courts don't solve this issue quickly, the president will pardon him second term, full pardon.
So that would be then a no at 62 cents?
A no at 62 cents.
A no at 62 cents. And will Trump grant clemency to Michael Flynn in the first term? Yeah, the rules here are pretty specific over on Predicted. The clemency will resolve as a yes if the name appears on the official list of presidential pardons and commutations that's maintained at the Department of Justice's office by February 15th, 2021. So that's the actual cutoff. So keep that in mind. We're going to move into the next market that has a similar rule, and that is, will Trump grant clemency to Paul Manafort in his first term? And in this market, the yeses are 51 cents and the no's are trading at about the same price. So it's about 50-50 right now, according to political traders. Of course, Manafort was charged with various financial crimes, including tax evasion and bank fraud and money laundering. I think there were all of 18 criminal charges, including falsification of income tax returns and failures to file foreign bank account reports and counts of bank fraud and fraud conspiracy. This past March, Scaramucci said the same thing about Manafort that he did about Flynn. Basically, granting clemency wouldn't help Trump's reelection, so it wasn't likely that it would happen in his first term. What say you, Mark?
I think the answer is yes, 51 cents.
Yes, and what's the reason for that?
It's because Paul Manafort's gone through hell in prison and in jail. They've treated him horribly, and now he's on home confinement. But none of those crimes that Paul Manafort was charged with, really none of that has anything to do with the Russia hoax, as the president says. And the president's going to clear the deck. Unlike Flynn hasn't gone to prison. Flynn hasn't suffered. He suffered financially, but he hasn't suffered physically. Paul Manafort has gone through hell, and so yes, the president will. My guess is the president will pardon Flynn in his first term.
So that's a yes. And at 50 cents, that's a nice payout in that market. So while we're on clemency, let's move to another hypothetical market. And this one is, will Trump pardon himself in the first term? This is an interesting market. It's currently trading. The yeses are 22 cents. The nos are 80 cents. The question, will Trump pardon himself in the first term? Just for context, during the Watergate scandal, President Nixon's lawyer suggested that a self-pardon would be a legal thing to do, while the Department of Justice issued a memorandum opinion back in 1974 saying explicitly that a president cannot pardon himself. And that's basically under the fundamental rule that no one may be a judge in their own case. So consequently, a president wouldn't be able to pardon himself. Any thoughts?
If the president loses, I say yes, he will pardon himself and his family in the first term. Because I think that the prosecutors, particularly in Manhattan, the Manhattan District Attorney, the Manhattan Attorney General, Letitia James, they have made it their top priority to go after the president and his family. And we've learned that, in lots of cases that you don't necessarily have to commit a crime for them to go after you. And so I do think because of that, because that they've already sort of made these comments in the press in New York that the president and his family are in their sights for that. If he does lose first term, I think the president does pardon himself.
What's interesting about this forecast is, of course, the polls are predicting that Joe Biden will prevail in the general election. Yet here's a 22-cent probability, which means a very, very attractive payout on a yes bet. There's also a workaround, though. This is a tricky market because under the 25th Amendment, the president actually could declare himself temporarily unable to perform the duties of the office. In that instance, the vice president would become the acting president, and such could pardon the president. Thereafter, a president could either resign or resume the duties of the office. So that might enter in the calculation as to whether or not it would be the president himself actually issuing the pardon for himself, because if he followed that protocol under the 25th Amendment, it would not be the president making the pardon. But your call is, if he loses the election in November, it's a yes at 22 cents. It's definitely a trade to note. It's a good one. I like that, Mark. Very interesting to watch that. The next market you pulled up for us is in Georgia, and that is which Georgia GOP Senate special election candidate will win most first-round votes. And this is between Kelly Loeffler and Doug Collins. Loeffler is currently the front runner here at 58%, Collins at 47%. Georgia's special election runoff will be held on November 3rd, 2020, and that's following Senator Isaacson's resignation, which was effective at the end of last year. So Governor Brian Kemp appointed Kelly Loeffler to serve as Isaacson's replacement until the special election. So it's going to be Loeffler and Collins. What's your call?
My call is that Collins wins that. I know he's up by a couple of percentage points, but the Collins takes that race. The president and his team have a closer relationship with Collins, and Collins has proven himself to be a trusted ally and soldier to the president during the investigations.
Well, the most recent poll of the race conducted by Monmouth had some good news for Loeffler, who has also been very supportive of the president, showing her leading with 26% of the vote and Collins at 20%. So as you said, you know that she appears to be out in front, but you're calling Collins to come through at 47 cents. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. Collins at 47 cents.
Okay, that's another good trade with a nice payout. Well, the next one's kind of fun because Kanye is always fun, and that is, will Kanye West be on the presidential ballot in Virginia? Of course, a New York Magazine article from Saturday said that West's campaign is trying to get on the ballot in Minnesota and Virginia, and there's a burden in Virginia. You must file 2,500 valid signatures by August 21st, and he has the additional burden of additional signatures in the state's 11 congressional districts to qualify. Only a week ago, the New York Times reported that West met with Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And there's a lot of speculation about West's motivation for running. So let's go to the first question. Will Kanye West be on the ballot in Virginia? What's your call?
No.
No. That's at 27 cents, another large payoff. Well, what can you tell us about Kanye's participation in this presidential election?
Kanye is really, I mean, he's close with the president and he's close with Jared Kushner. And I think what Kanye is doing is he's a flare. He's providing a distraction and to pull black votes away from Joe Biden. And Kanye's got tremendous support in the black community because of his music. And I think he's doing this he doesn't need publicity and he doesn't need to sell more records. The guy's a billionaire and he's got, 50, 60 million followers on Twitter and he's married to Kim Kardashian, but he's doing this to help the president.
So he's clearly a spoiler in this race.
That's right.
If that's the case, why isn't he endorsing the president directly?
You don't have to. It's still early on. I mean, the Democratic convention is right this week, and we've got the Republican next week. A day is 1,000 years in politics, but for right now, Kanye is getting some attention, and it's certainly no question about it. Pulls black votes away from Joe Biden.
And why not in Virginia though? Why won't he make it on the ballot in Virginia?
Virginia is a Democratic-run state now, and they got the Democratic governor. It's home to the 2 Democratic senators, and they know exactly what Kanye's doing. They can read the tea leaves or read between the lines. So I think, and Kanye has had some problems with getting on the ballot. I think Mickey Mouse was one of the names on the signatures. There were several pages in other states that he submitted signatures that appeared that it was the same handwriting. So there's some integrity issues with whoever's getting these signatures for Kanye. So because of that, his signature is going to be under that much more scrutiny, which is going to make it very, very tough.
So let's move into the last market before we move into the lockbox segment, and that is, will Trump meet with North Korean Chairman Kim Jong-un in 2020?
A day is like 1,000 years in politics, and President Trump has been working very hard on this. So I think it's quite possible, yes, that Trump can meet with Kim Jong-un in 2020. Showing national security and trying to create this deal. We saw that the plan with the UAE and Israel. So I don't think it's off the table for the president to be working on some sort of deal with North Korea. So yes, my bet is that the president could meet with Kim Jong-un and Chairman Kim Jong-un in 2020.
And that's a 12-cent trade. So again, a very high payout. I think you're making an assumption here that would you expect that to happen during this campaign period prior to the November election?
The president's so unpredictable, and it just depends on what's happening in the regions. A lot of this just kind of depends on what's happening in that part of the world, but it's definitely not off the table.
So high payout, long shot trade. Will the president meet with Kim in 2020? Your answer is yes, at 12 cents. Those are great trades, Mark. It was a lot of fun taking you in the trading picks. And remember, if you are listening to this broadcast and you're not already trading on PredictIt, we do have $20 for you. You can take advantage of the trades that Mark has shared by going to predictit.org/promo/TPT20. Sign up, deposit $20, and we'll match that first $20 you deposited. That's predictit.org/promo/TPT20. Deposit 20, you'll have 40 to trade with. It's that simple. So we're going to take one more quick break, but when we come back, we'll be asking Mark for his Luckbox Lockbox trade. I've previewed this, and I know it's something special. We'll be right back. We're back, and of course, most gamblers and traders know a luck box is an undeserving recipient of a favorable outlier outcome. It's also the name of our award-winning magazine. And fans of political rhetoric will always remember the term lockbox, which was popularized by Saturday Night Live cast member Darrell Hammond during the 2000 presidential run.
I would put it in what I call a lockbox.
And never gets old for me. In our Luckbox Lockbox segment, we will ask our guests always to identify a current predicted trade that looks like a lock or a sure thing. This is something that they can bet comfortably on with no remorse, dependent on the outcome. And of course, anything can happen. Bet responsibly. But Mark, we asked you for your opinion as to which trade you have the highest conviction with respect to the outcome. And We look forward to your answer. What can you tell us?
Hands down. So I believe that Donald Trump will win the 2020 presidential election unequivocally, without a shadow of a doubt.
And that is a big one because who will win the 2020 U.S. presidential election, of course, is the biggest market on predicted right now. Currently, Joe Biden is at 58 cents. Donald Trump is at 45 cents. So 58% to 45% are the current price quotes on that. And your pick is so interesting as a lockbox because it defies pretty much everything that exists as conventional wisdom out there.
Right.
Just last week, Microsoft research economist David Rothschild was our guest, arguing in the opposite position, as did Rachel Bidikofer, who's an election maven over at the Niskanen Center. It defies what the markets are telling us, and prediction markets are noted for their accuracy as a aggregator of forecasts. It defies what the polls are telling us at 538, which the polling averages are giving Biden about an 8.5 point lead over Trump. And it defies some conventional wisdom out there. So how does he pull this off?
Yeah, well, first of all, a lot of it's the silent majority. Um, I think people are afraid of starting fights with family, friends, colleagues, coworkers, neighbors, and so they'll listen to what's happening and what their people are talking about, but they may not necessarily weigh in, and they're going to keep that quiet. We saw the silent majority is kind of what pushed Donald Trump across the finish line in 2016. I mean, all the polls had Hillary Clinton winning in 2016. In fact, Hillary didn't even prepare a concession speech. She didn't need to, because going into election day, she was winning. And so I think that, I take this in the venture capital world. There's no secret sauce. 70% of startups will fail. And it doesn't matter if you have the best venture capital team behind you, those are the numbers. And so I think that we saw that in 2016, the polling was wrong. Polling can be weaponized to suppress voters, to suppress excitement. But I think that Donald Trump, at the end of the day, he's got the advantage because Biden's numbers went up during COVID when everyone was sheltering in place because he was hiding Biden. He wasn't out. And now that people are beginning to see Biden come out a little bit, his poll numbers are dropping and Trump's are going up. CNN just did a poll a couple of days ago that said that they're literally Trump has narrowed the lead and they're within the margin of error. And 59%, and this is why it's important, why I'm so confident, 59% of voters think that Joe Biden has dementia, early stage dementia, and that he may not even possibly finish out a first term as elected. And so the mental fitness of of being the president is a very important question. If 59% of voters think that the Democratic nominee for president suffers from early stage dementia, that's a problem. And what does his campaign do? If, as a campaign operative, as a political strategist, if my candidate was, if I was seeing those polling numbers for my candidate saying he suffers from early stage dementia, your initial reaction would be, we got to get you the hell out of here. And you're going to be giving interviews to everybody. Every single person you're going to be granting interviews to. What has the Biden campaign done? They've still kept them hidden. So that should tell you, if that's the lesser of the two evils, how bad is Biden in real life if they're hiding? Even Chris Wallace on Fox News Channel, who's a Democrat, he criticizes the president a lot on Fox News Channel. He's hard on him. But last week, Chris Wallace said, give the president some credit. He's out there talking to reporters and taking the tough questions. Joe Biden has denied, in his campaign, has denied all of our requests for an interview. And his campaign has denied the request of the interview for most of my colleagues at other networks and at other newspapers. And so at the end of the day, it's going to be lawlessness and looting, and what we've seen a lot here in Chicago, or law and order. It's going to be who's going to be the person that can take us out of this economic rut that was created by this invisible enemy, the coronavirus. Is it Joe Biden, who's been in politics for over 40 years, who's been part of this problem, not part of the solution? And now as a presidential candidate, he's got all the solutions. But what happened 40 years ago? Or is it Donald Trump, who brought us to a strong economy? Let's bring us back to the economy that we had in February. Lowest unemployment rate for blacks and Hispanics and Asians. Lowest unemployment for women in over 50 years. I mean, we had a strong economy. Donald Trump did it before. He can do it again. And so I think at the end of the day, voters vote their pocketbook. And if we start to see the economy rise, Biden keeps talking and stumbling and as a gaffe machine, I think that the surprise winner on all of this is going to be Donald Trump. It's in his favor.
Well, clearly the tide has started to turn. We've documented this in previous episodes, but when the president was trading in the mid 50s for a long time, one of our guests predicted that a reversal and a Biden surge based on the spreading of the coronavirus and the impact that it would have on the nation, and how the administration's response to the crisis was going to be judged. And he was dead on and accurate, and saw the price rise for Joe Biden up to the low 60s at one point. And now it is backing off in the mid 50s, or let's say 58 cents. You're predicting an outright Trump win, which is the first time that's been predicted on our show in the last several months. So we are going to be watching your Luckbox Lockbox trade very, very carefully, Mark. Mark, I have to tell you, I really enjoyed having you on. It's such a great story about how you orchestrated this commutation for Governor Blagojevich and your participation with Roger Stone. I suggest our listeners out there follow Mark on Twitter. He's at Mark A. Vargas on Twitter, Mark A. Vargas. Follow him along with everyone else in the White House press corps. That's who essentially his followers are. And listen to him weekly on the Lightning Rod podcast with Governor Rod Blagojevich. Mark, thank you so much. It's been great having you on.
Jeff and Mike, thanks for the opportunity.
And that's going to wrap up today's episode. Thanks for tuning into The Political Trade. Tell your friends about us, and make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And also check out thepoliticaltrade.com to sign up for a newsletter, find us on social media, or send us a message. It's all there at thepoliticaltrade.com. Before we go, I've got a big announcement. Mike, any other news? Do you have an announcement, or should I share ours?
Well, Jeff, whoever delivers it, it's really exciting news. So why don't you take it?
Well, I'll take it. And it's, you can only guess how this happened, but our next guest on the next episode of The Political Trade will be former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich. So, Mark, thanks for making that happen, and we truly look forward to having the governor on and hearing his story about life behind bars, the ordeal coming up to his release, and to hearing it directly from him in this exclusive broadcast and the next Political Trade. So until then, this is Jeff Joseph.
And I'm Mike Reddy.
And remember to believe in math, master your trade, and join us next time on The Political Trade.